Come a little closer, because this isn't the kind of message you hear and simply forget. Something has changed around you, not because someone announced it, not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because you became harder to ignore. Somewhere behind closed doors, your name moved from ordinary to important. You were placed on a priority list, and suddenly the people who once felt untouchable are looking twice. Your enemies are realizing something they never expected. You are not easy to touch anymore. The rules changed quietly. The balance shifted without warning. And now, the ones watching from the shadows are beginning to understand exactly what they're dealing with. There was a time when nobody needed to pay attention to you because you were still trying to prove that you mattered. You explained yourself. You chased recognition. You wanted certain people to understand your intentions, your struggles, your potential. But something changed when you stopped doing that. You became quieter, more selective, more difficult to read. And strangely enough, that silence created more attention than all your explanations ever could. You did not announce your transformation. You did not walk into the room demanding respect. You simply started moving differently. You stopped reacting to every insult. You stopped defending every decision. You stopped giving everyone access to your thoughts, your plans, and your emotions. That is when people began noticing something they could not easily explain. The person they thought they understood was disappearing, and someone far more disciplined was taking their place. That is why your name ended up on a priority list without you asking for it. You became important because your behavior became unpredictable to people who were accustomed to controlling the narrative around you. They knew how to provoke the old version of you. They knew what words could make you angry. They knew which weaknesses to touch. They knew how to pull you into arguments and waste your energy. But now, their old methods don't work the same way anymore. You learn that attention is expensive. Every reaction costs something. Every argument consumes energy. Every attempt to prove yourself gives someone else control over your emotional state. So you started choosing your battles differently. Sometimes you said nothing. Sometimes you walked away. Sometimes you watched everything unfold without revealing what you were thinking. And that silence became disturbing to people who expected a reaction. They started wondering what you knew. They started wondering what you were planning. They started wondering why you were no longer desperate to be understood. That is the strange thing about becoming powerful. Real power rarely announces itself. It doesn't need a microphone. It doesn't need applause. It appears in the moment when someone tries to provoke you and discovers that you are no longer available for manipulation. You became a priority because you became harder to predict. The people watching you may not understand your entire transformation, but they can see the evidence. Your confidence is different. Your boundaries are stronger. Your patience is longer. Your standards are higher. You are no longer giving everyone unlimited chances to disrespect you and then pretending everything is fine. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable for those who benefited from the old version of you. They remember when you tolerated things you would never tolerate now. They remember when you questioned yourself because someone questioned you. They remember when you needed approval. They remember when they could disappear from your life and return whenever they wanted. But that version of you is becoming a memory. Now there is something different in your presence. You don't have to threaten anyone. You don't have to expose anyone. You don't have to announce that you've changed. Your behavior speaks before you do. And people notice behavior. They notice when you stop explaining. They notice when you stop chasing. They notice when you stop responding immediately. They notice when your attention becomes selective. They notice when you begin protecting your peace like it is something valuable. Suddenly, The person they barely noticed has become the person they cannot comfortably ignore. Your progress forces them to reconsider the assumptions they made about you. Your discipline challenges their expectations. Your silence makes them curious. Your distance makes them wonder what changed. And perhaps the most unsettling part is that you are no longer doing any of this to impress them. You are doing it because you finally understand that your life becomes powerful when you stop handing strangers the authority to define your worth. That is when being placed on the priority list stops feeling like a threat and starts revealing something much deeper. People pay attention when they realize the person they underestimated is no longer waiting for permission to become who they were always capable of becoming. They thought you were an easy target because they confused your patience with weakness. They watched you remain calm while they tested your boundaries. They saw you forgive people who did not deserve another chance. They noticed how often you chose peace instead of confrontation, and somewhere along the way, they created a version of you inside their minds that simply wasn't real. They assumed you would always react the same way. They assumed they could push you, provoke you, manipulate you, and then walk away without consequences. But they misunderstood the person you were becoming. You were never weak. You were learning. Every disappointment taught you something. Every betrayal showed you another side of human nature. Every time someone tried to use your kindness against you, you became a little more aware. You started recognizing patterns. You learned that not everyone deserves access to your emotions. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone deserves another opportunity to hurt you. And eventually, something inside you became colder. Not cruel, not heartless, but disciplined. You stopped giving people the reaction they wanted. That was the moment the game changed. Because some people don't want to understand you. They want to control your response to them. They want to say something that makes you angry, then watch you lose control. They want to create confusion, then blame you for reacting to the confusion they created. They want to provoke you until you become the villain in a story they designed themselves. But you started seeing the trap before stepping into it. Now someone can insult you and you can remain silent. Someone can misunderstand you and you don't rush to correct them. Someone can walk away and you don't chase them. Someone can underestimate you and instead of arguing, you let time reveal the truth. That kind of composure makes certain people uncomfortable because they can no longer predict your next move. They expected you to fight every battle. You learned to choose which battles deserve your energy. They expected you to explain every decision. You learned that your life does not require permission from spectators. They expected you to break when they withdrew their approval. You discovered that your confidence does not depend on their acceptance. This is why your enemies are realizing you are not easy to touch anymore. Not because you became dangerous in the way they imagined, but because you became difficult to manipulate. Their access to your emotions became limited. Their opinions became less powerful. Their attempts to create insecurity stopped producing the same results. And when manipulation stops working, people often reveal themselves. They may become louder. They may become more desperate. They may suddenly pretend they never cared. They may attempt to bring up your past because they cannot compete with your present. They may remind you of every mistake you ever made because your growth makes them uncomfortable. But you don't have to return to the person you were simply because someone else is uncomfortable with who you are becoming. Let them misunderstand. Let them speculate. Let them create theories about your silence. You don't have to interrupt every false story people tell about you. Sometimes the strongest response is progress. Sometimes the most powerful answer is becoming so focused on your own life that the people trying to distract you eventually realize they have been fighting for access to someone who no longer wants to participate in their game. Your enemies may still be watching, but watching is not controlling. They may still talk, but talking is not power. They may still remember your old weaknesses, but knowing your history does not give them ownership of your future. You have changed the rules by changing yourself. The old version of you might have rushed to defend every accusation. The new version understands that not every accusation deserves an answer. The old version might have begged people to recognize your value. The new version understands that value does not disappear simply because someone refuses to acknowledge it. And this is what they did not see coming. You didn't become stronger by becoming louder. You became stronger by becoming harder to manipulate. You became stronger by learning when to speak and when to remain silent. You became stronger by understanding that emotional control is not the absence of emotion. It is refusing to let someone else hold the remote control to your mind. Now they are facing a problem they never planned for. The person they thought they could easily provoke has developed patience. The person they thought they could easily influence has developed boundaries. The person they thought would always return has learned how to walk away. The person they thought needed their approval has finally discovered that approval from the wrong people can become another form of captivity. There are moments when protection does not look like a wall standing in front of you. Sometimes it looks like a door suddenly closing. Sometimes it looks like a person disappearing from your life without explanation. Sometimes it looks like a plan falling apart at the last second, a conversation you never had, an opportunity you almost received but somehow missed. At first, you may have called these things disappointments. You may have wondered why everything was changing around you. But with distance, you began to notice something strange. Some of the things you thought were losses were actually removing access to you. Not everyone who wants to reach you deserves to reach you. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Not every person deserves a front row seat in your life. And sometimes the greatest protection comes from creating distance between you and the things that were quietly draining your strength. You may have noticed that certain people no longer have the same influence over you. They can still speak. They can still make assumptions. They can still remember the version of you they once controlled. But the access has changed. The door that used to remain open is no longer unlocked. That changes everything. Because when someone has access to your emotions, they can influence your decisions. When someone has access to your insecurities, they can use them against you. When someone knows exactly what makes you afraid, angry, or uncertain, they can push those buttons whenever they want. But you started removing the buttons. You stopped explaining your weaknesses to people who had already proven they could weaponize them. You stopped revealing every plan before it was complete. You stopped telling everyone where you were going next. You realized that privacy is not secrecy. Sometimes privacy is protection. And this is where the game quietly shifted. The people who once felt comfortable approaching you began encountering boundaries. The situations that once consumed your attention began losing their power. The distractions that once seemed irresistible started looking exactly like what they were. Distractions. You became selective, and being selective changed the kind of energy surrounding you. Some people left because they could no longer access the old version of you. Some conversations ended because you refused to participate in unnecessary chaos. Some relationships became distant because you stopped carrying the entire weight of maintaining them. It hurt. Of course it hurt. Protection does not always feel comfortable while it is happening. Sometimes you will miss people who were not good for you. Sometimes you will question decisions that were actually saving you from something you could not yet see. Sometimes you will look at a closed door and wonder why it had to close. But not every closed door is punishment. Some doors close because you have already outgrown what was behind them. And maybe that is what makes this chapter so different. You are no longer trying to force everything to stay. You are allowing people to reveal themselves. You are allowing circumstances to show you what belongs in your life and what does not. You are learning that peace is not something you find after everyone agrees with you. Peace is something you protect even when people misunderstand you. That is why the protection around you changed the game. You became harder to reach through manipulation, harder to disturb through gossip, harder to control through guilt, harder to distract through empty promises, harder to pull backward through old memories. The people who once knew exactly how to get a reaction from you are discovering that their map is outdated. They are trying old routes and finding closed roads. They are repeating old strategies and getting different results. They are looking for the old weakness and discovering growth instead. And perhaps you don't even realize how powerful that is. You don't need to fight every person who tried to hurt you. You don't need to expose every person who betrayed you. You don't need to make everyone understand why you walked away. Sometimes your greatest victory is simply refusing to reopen a door that took tremendous strength to close. The world may still test you. People may still attempt to cross your boundaries. Old patterns may still try to return wearing new faces. But now you recognize the difference between an opportunity and a distraction, between connection and dependence, between kindness and self-abandonment. You understand that protecting yourself does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming conscious. It means knowing that your attention has value, your time has value, your peace has value, your future has value, and anything that repeatedly threatens those things does not automatically deserve another chance. The balance shifted because you stopped making your life available to everyone who demanded access. You began choosing who gets close. You began choosing what deserves your energy. You began choosing which battles deserve your voice. And suddenly, the people who once believed they could reach you whenever they wanted are standing outside a door that no longer opens simply because they knock. They can watch from a distance. They can wonder what changed. They can remember the person you used to be, but they cannot force their way into a life that you finally learned how to protect. Now they are watching every move you make, and the strange part is that you may not even realize how much attention your silence has created. People who once ignored your decisions are suddenly studying them. People who never cared where you were going are suddenly curious about your next step. They are watching how you respond, what you say, what you refuse to say, who you allow close, and who you leave behind. Not because you asked them to watch, but because your transformation created a question they cannot easily answer. What happened to you? Where did that confidence come from? Why don't you react the way you used to? Why aren't you desperate to prove yourself anymore? Those questions are powerful because they reveal something important. You stopped performing for an audience. You stopped living to convince people. And when you stop trying to prove yourself, your actions become much more difficult to predict. The people who underestimated you were comfortable when they could understand your patterns. They knew what would make you angry. They knew what would make you explain yourself. They knew how to make you doubt your decisions. They knew which buttons to push because you had spent years showing them where those buttons were. But now you have changed the controls. You don't respond immediately. You observe. You don't reveal every plan. You execute. You don't announce every goal. You work quietly. And that silence creates something that words never could: curiosity. People begin filling the empty spaces with their own assumptions. They wonder what you know. They wonder what you are preparing for. They wonder why you seem calmer while everything around you appears uncertain. But you don't owe them an explanation. You don't need to tell everyone what you are building before it exists. You don't need to announce every improvement. You don't need to defend every choice. Sometimes the most powerful move is simply continuing forward while everyone else is waiting for you to turn around. And this is where your greatest advantage appears. You are no longer trying to control what people think about you. You are controlling what you do next. That difference changes everything because opinions are unpredictable. People can praise you today and criticize you tomorrow. They can celebrate your success and then pretend it was luck. They can misunderstand your intentions and create stories about your motives. But your actions remain yours. Your discipline remains yours. Your direction remains yours. Your focus remains yours. That is why watching you will eventually become frustrating for those who want you to fail. They are waiting for an emotional collapse. They are waiting for you to make the mistake they predicted. They are waiting for you to become distracted by their opinions. But what if you don't? What if you simply keep moving? What if every insult becomes another reason to protect your peace? What if every doubt becomes another reason to sharpen your discipline? What if every attempt to distract you becomes a reminder of what you are building? Then suddenly, the people watching you are no longer studying someone they can control. They are studying someone they cannot easily understand. And that can make people uncomfortable, not because you are doing something wrong, but because you have become independent from the reactions they once relied on. You are no longer available for every argument. You are no longer desperate for every invitation. You are no longer chasing every person who walks away. You are no longer explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. You have learned that sometimes the strongest statement you can make is simply living well, without announcing that you are doing it. Let them watch. Let them wonder. Let them talk. You don't have to interrupt the observers. You don't have to prove that they are wrong. You don't have to reveal everything you know. Your job is not to manage their curiosity. Your job is to manage your direction, because eventually, results speak a language that opinions cannot compete with. The person who once underestimated you may eventually see the consequences of their judgment. The people who laughed at your quiet progress may eventually notice how far you traveled while they were busy discussing your starting point. And when that happens, you won't need a speech. You won't need revenge. You won't need to remind them of every time they doubted you. You will simply be standing somewhere they never expected you to reach. That is the power of moving without constantly announcing your destination. You become difficult to stop because you become difficult to distract. Your enemies may continue watching every move, searching for weakness, waiting for a mistake, hoping you will return to the version of yourself they understood. But they may eventually discover something they never planned for. You are not returning. You are becoming someone who understands that attention is not the same thing as importance. Observation is not the same thing as control. And being watched does not mean you have to change your direction. The moment you stop performing for the people watching you is the moment their eyes lose the power to determine where you go next.